Today is the day we celebrate moms. And moms are adored and somehow, at the same time, often underappreciated. And we talked about this last year, and since I'm a little late getting up here, we're just going to go boop, 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 boop. This is all funny. This is all good. Difference between moms and dads. Yep. I've done this. I'm sure a lot of you dads can attest to this. Yeah, that looks accurate too. I would say this pretty much sums up my kid's childhood right here. I'm just like, you guys got this. I got to watch out for myself. You'll see this guy has got his hands. He's got to protect himself, and mom is going to self-sacrifice her own safety, not even watching where she's going. She's just got eyes on the baby. And what I want to talk about today, I want to give a couple of looks at two women in the Bible who embody just the women's natural ability, generally speaking, their natural ability to embody this self-sacrificial love. And just how incredibly gifted they are at that, and how God has blessed them. And so, to start, we're going to be in Ruth, but we're going to be looking at Naomi and her just beautiful example of what a mother's love looks like. And Naomi is living during the time of the Judges. And quick side note, we've kind of romanticized the Judges. I think it's probably a byproduct of us teaching these stories to our children. And so we're kind of like, oh, the Judges, these people. The book of Judges should come with a warning label on it. It is a violent, horrible time. Not only were the Israelites bad, the judges themselves get progressively worse. We talk about Gideon, we're like, oh, he did these things. And then we go, we're not going to talk about the rest of his story. Pretty rough. Samson, we're like, oh, mighty Samson. Samson is the Hall of Fame for dum-dums. That guy, all brawn, no brains, like case study. And then Jephthah, oh my goodness, that guy was ridiculous. And he ended up sacrificing his own daughter because he did not understand God, and he was a judge. It said that he hung out with raiders. He's basically the Wild West version, and he ended up being a judge. And this is the time period that Naomi becomes a mother, which kind of makes me chuckle sometimes when I hear people say, oh, I don't know if I would want to raise a kid in today's world. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. I don't know. There were much worse times to have done it, but that's besides the point. The world that Naomi is raising a time in is that crazy world. So we see in Ruth 1:1, in the day when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land. So a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. And so I know you all are retaining 100% of the geographical and historical knowledge Mark is giving you in Bible class. So when I pull this map up, you guys are like, yep, I know exactly where Moab is. But for my sake, just so you know, Moab is down here, right down here. They come from Bethlehem, they cross the Dead Sea and go to Moab. Historical references, Moabites are the descendants of Abraham's nephew, Lot. From Genesis, we learn that Lot kind of foolish too. So they're going to a land that has food, but descendants of a foolish man. So while living in Moab, Naomi has her 2 sons, and they marry Moabite women, Ruth and Orpah. But over the years, Ruth loses her husband, and then she ends up losing not one, but both of her sons. And we have a word for a child that loses their parents at a young age as an orphan. And we have a word for a husband or a wife that loses their spouse. That's a widow or widower. But in English and in many languages and cultures, there isn't a word for a parent who loses a child, because the pain is indescribable. It's not the way it's intended to be. And so you have to imagine Naomi is heartbroken. And she's second-guessing it, probably asking all of these questions, a lot of guilt. If only I had stayed in the land of my people, maybe this wouldn't have happened. What did maybe I do to God to cause this? And probably the inevitable question she probably asked, why them and not me? I think we all kind of know that at some day we have to say goodbye to our parents. We all know that. At some more deep level, we have to say goodbye to our past. But how do you say goodbye to your future? Our children, as they grow, we get to kind of form this bond with them. And I've been blessed. This past year has been kind of fun with Noah. As he's hit 6th grade, he's come to the realization that I am funny. And this has been really a great time for him and I. Not so much for Tamara, as she has been the subject of some of our humor, but Noah and I, our bond has grown this year in a way that was much different previous years. But as our bond and our relationship grows, so does our hope, my hope as a parent, that he will one day be the person who will care for me in my old age, but also that he will inherit the things that I work for. I will be able to pass this stuff down to him when I'm gone. But for Naomi, that didn't happen. And the book of Ruth is interesting. It's the name of the book is Ruth, but this is just as much Naomi's story as it is Ruth's, and we'll see that here. Immediately following the mention of the deaths of her husband and sons, we don't see this just broken Naomi. Instead, we see starting in verse 6, when Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had provided, that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Naomi steels herself to be strong for her widowed daughters-in-law. She defers her own grief to care for them, knowing that they've lost their husbands and providers, even though she lost her own husband and provider and her children. There's nothing worse in ancient times than being a widow. They were neglected, they were taken advantage of, they were ignored, they were almost always stuck living in poverty. Ruth and Orpah were now the only family Naomi had. And these 3 wives, now widowed, grieved and comforted each other at the loss of their husbands, and with great faith, not knowing what awaited them, decided to leave Moab for Judah. And Naomi takes Ruth and Orpah. But on the way to Judah, Naomi has second thoughts. And she encourages Ruth and Orpah to remain with their own people. Against her own desire for companionship, Naomi questioned, was this right for these 2 young women to forsake their family and their people for an uncertain future? What chance would they have as widows and strangers in Bethlehem? Even in her desperate situation, Naomi has a very selfless, loving, what's in the best interest for these people attitude. Naomi encouraged them to go back to their mother's home. She told them, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to me." In fact, she even adds, "May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Can you imagine how hard that must have been to say to your son, dead son's widower? But she wants what's best for him. I can only imagine that in saying these farewells, these young tears streaming down their cheeks, these young widows beg Naomi not to send them away. And Naomi says, "Return home, my daughters." And she says, "Why would you come with me?" This is Naomi talking to them. "Even if I had a husband right now, even if I had a kid right now, what do you got to do? Wait for them to grow up? No, go." And so Orpah eventually journeyed home to Moab, but Ruth clung to Naomi, pledging her loyalty. And she says, and we've heard this one, Don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." Naomi had a profound mothering influence in the life of Ruth. Naomi, who had lost both her sons, came to view Ruth as well as Orpah as her own daughters. In these verses, Naomi refers to them both multiple times as her own daughters. Not daughters-in-laws anymore, daughters. In her heart, they were her daughters. While the focus of this book is Ruth, Ruth became who she was because of Naomi, and she's telling her that. She's telling Naomi, because you are, I am. Is there any one of us this morning who cannot say it wasn't because of the influence of a mother or a grandmother or any woman who God placed in our lives like Naomi that we've become the person we've become? That we wouldn't have become these people if they had not wiped away our tears, calmed our fears, picked us up when we had fallen down, corrected us when we were wrong. I've been blessed to have grown up in this church, and I called a lot of ladies in this church my second moms. I used to go over to the Benson house all the time. And it got to the point where Sue would say, "Dave, stop ringing the doorbell and just get in here." And I would go in, and I'd go and hang out in Bob's room, and without fail, every time, she'd open the door. "You guys need anything? Popcorn? I can make cookies. You guys need a meal? Dave, you thirsty? You want something to drink?" We never went hungry. She called me Dave. I call her Della. She didn't care for that, though. I grew up in this church with a lot of extra moms, and those moms handed down their faith and values and taught so many kids that with God, all things are possible. And they loved me, and now they love my kids and so many other kids unconditionally, no matter what. And we see this here because of the relationship Naomi had with Ruth. Ruth became who she was. When her husband and sons died, Naomi became the head of the household. And as the matriarch, even before they decided to leave for Judah, both Orpah and Ruth's lives had been touched by Naomi's influence. They heard her pray. Oh, they heard her pray. They saw how she worshiped the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. They witnessed how she made ends meet, how strong she was for them, even though her own heart was broken, and how she tried to provide a loving home in the midst of a famine. Naomi had endured severe hardship, but her faith in God helped a growing faith in Ruth. Wherever you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. As a Moabite widow going into a foreign land, Ruth was willing to give up her own religion, her people and families, a possibility of marriage and children so she could care for Naomi. And Naomi was learning an important lesson here too, something that I feel is probably very hard for a lot of parents, but probably especially hard for our nurturing and caring parents, moms to learn especially. And that is that we cannot protect our kids from their testimonies. We cannot protect our children from who God is calling them to be. And that brings me to the next biblical mother, Hannah. Her story unfolds in the book of 1 Samuel, and Hannah was a woman who longed for a child, but faced with the heart-wrenching reality of barrenness, could not have that. Despite being deeply loved by her husband, he had another wife, and she was a real piece of work. Hannah found herself trapped in a state of hopelessness and helplessness, surrounded by constant reminders that she had no children. And Peninnah, that other horrible woman, scorned her for years, causing Hannah profound anguish, leaving her broken and destitute, even to the point of not eating. And then one day we find and we read this story of Hannah, and she's in the temple, immersed in sorrow, pouring her heart out to God. And she is telling God, I am willing to just give this child back to you if you would only bless me with a child at all. And tears streaming down her face, she's pleading with God. Her lips are moving, but the words won't even come out. And seeing this, Eli, the high priest, approaches her in anger, thinking she's intoxicated. But Hannah, filled with humility and respect, answers him, and she says, I'm a woman who is deeply troubled. I have not been drinking wine or beer. I'm pouring out my soul. And she says, don't think I'm a wicked woman, for I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow. And Eli is moved by her sincerity, and he responds with a blessing. Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant your petition that you have asked him. And the Bible records that Hannah left with a radiant face and that she finally found solace in partaking of food. And I found that the partaking of food has helped my wife in our house and our family, just word to the wise. But before long, God graciously answered Hannah's prayers with a son, Samuel. And true to her promise, after she weaned him, she devoted Samuel entirely to God's service. In the same temple where she had poured out her soul, she fulfilled her vow. Samuel, though still a small child, was dedicated to God. She comes back to the temple and she goes up to Eli and says, do you remember me? God answered my prayer with a son. And she says, now I am giving him to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord his whole life. She relinquished her right to raise her child and prioritize her commitment to the one who faithfully kept his word. God hears a mother's cry, and he is near to those who seek him. How difficult would it be to release your child, surrendering them completely to God's will? How many of us would be willing to lay aside our own personal desires and ambitions and dreams for our children in support of their dreams for the sake of God's greater purpose? Hannah gave Samuel over to God at basically 3 years old, roughly. And he became, in my opinion, we can argue this later if you want, the greatest judge to ever live in the land of Israel. And a prophet. He was so faithful that God spoke directly to him. What an honor that was. Hannah's faithfulness to God laid the foundation that allowed Samuel to become the best version of himself for God. Hannah's commitment yielded immeasurable blessings for her own life. She went on to have 3 more sons and 2 daughters, undoubtedly experiencing the joy of God's faithfulness. Our willingness to sacrifice in obedience to God has far-reaching implications. When we released our loved ones into his capable hands, we allow him to work miracles in their lives, no matter how hard that is, and he fulfills his perfect plans. And that's what played out for Naomi and Ruth. Because of her loving relationship with God and the tragedy of losing her husband and 2 sons, God knew that Naomi needed Ruth as much as Ruth needed Naomi. Their relationship was strengthened by a mutual love for each other and for God. When we see and understand the struggles that our mothers and any of the women who raised us went through so that we might have what we have, it blesses us and it honors them. It makes you want to honor them every day, not just some random Sunday in May. Ruth's determination to go where Naomi went was in honor of how Naomi had blessed her life. The loyalty Ruth demonstrated to Naomi was the value she placed on Naomi having been that mother to her. When we read the full text of Ruth, Naomi in many ways paved the way for Ruth, paved the way through her faith, paved the way with her decision, her bold decision to return to Judah, paved the way by introducing Ruth to a relative of her deceased husband, Boaz. But look at how God works in blessing the faithfulness of these mothers who worshiped him in the midst of having made tremendous personal sacrifices. As the story goes, in time, Boaz made Ruth his wife. And Ruth had a baby, Obed. And Obed had a son named Jesse. Jesse had a son named David. And David was the greatest king that Israel ever had until King Jesus came. And Naomi was part of the lineage of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. In chapter 4, the end of this book, the women of the community came to not Ruth. They came to Naomi. Praise be to the Lord who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons has given him birth. And you want to hear the beautiful end of this story? Naomi got to take this young baby boy and hold him close and was given the honor of being allowed to love and nurture this child. And the women in the community saw this, and with unspeakable joy in their hearts, realizing all that Naomi had gone through, gave a shout of praise, saying this: not Ruth has a son. Naomi has a son. Naomi had no husband. She had no living children. Yet Naomi had a brand new baby boy. God had restored her. God works like that still today. As we celebrate Mother's Day, who are our Naomis and our Hannahs blessing our lives? Is it a biological mother? Is it a grandmother, an aunt, a stepmother, a Bible class teacher? Who is it? Or perhaps our Naomi or our Hannah is an image of more than just one woman. But we can say without a doubt to the mothers in our lives, because you are, I am. Because of the life you lived and the love you showed, my life has been made all the better, all the richer, all the more meaningful. And you want to know the most beautiful thing about those women in our lives? And I guarantee you this: that's all they've ever wanted for us. The invitation is simple today. If you haven't been baptized today, there's no better way to honor those women than to let them know that their God will be your God. We'll make time even on Mother's Day to baptize anyone. If you're in need in any way, this church family is ready to be your people. You can stay with us. Let us know how we can love and serve you. Come as we stand and sing.